He could barely eat due to his disfigured jaw. He suffered from rickets, hallucinations, and an oversized head. He was both impotent and infertile. Charles II of Spain, king of one of the largest empires in the world, was barely able to talk or walk, all because his dynasty was so inbred. Royal inbreeding led to severe mutations and birth defects that could be even worse than the already estimable genetic mutations from incest. In fact, Charles II of Spain was more inbred than a child born from a sibling union. This extreme inbreeding ultimately explained his decline. By age 35, he had lost all his hair and could barely walk. And before he turned 39, he died without an heir, plunging Europe into a bloody war as various nations vied for his crown. Charles II was born in Spain on November 6, 1661, already burdened by the weight of his family's infamous history of dynastic inbreeding. From the moment he entered the world, it was clear that something was wrong. His parents, Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria, were uncle and niece, and both were themselves the offspring of first cousins. In Europe at the time, it was common for nobles to marry close relatives for political reasons. However, even by these standards, the Spanish Habsburgs took the practice to an extreme. Modern research indicates that Charles was more inbred than a typical child born of a brother-sister union. From birth, Charles was a sickly and fragile child. There were even rumours that his sexual organs were ambiguous, making it unclear whether he was male or female. The French ambassador described the unfortunate newborn as a child with herpes-type rashes, a head covered in scabs, and a kind of channel or drainage that oozes from the right ear. By the age of 4, poor baby Charles still couldn't stand upright, as the fontanelles in his skull had not yet fused. Unfortunately for him, this was also the age at which he inherited the Spanish throne after his father's death. Until the age of 5, he was fed exclusively on breast milk from 14 different wet nurses working in rotation. His tongue was so large and his jaw so misaligned that he didn't learn to speak until he was 8. He was unable to chew his food, so he often swallowed it whole and vomited it back up. Despite his many ailments, Charles survived infancy, an incredible miracle given the level of medical knowledge of the time. However, the effects of inbreeding were undeniable. He suffered from chronic digestive issues, seizures, and what modern doctors suspect was a pituitary hormone deficiency, which stunted both his physical and mental development. His health was so fragile that many believed he would not survive to adulthood. Rumours swirled that he was bewitched or cursed, earning him the infamous nickname El Hechizado, the Bewitched. Due to his young age and extreme frailty, Spain was governed by a regency council led by his mother Mariana of Austria for much of his early reign. However, the regency was plagued by internal conflict, political factionalism, and corruption, as powerful court figures vied for influence over the weak child king. Mariana's tenure as regent relied heavily on her confessor, the German Jesuit Johann Nithard, who effectively ruled Spain. His influence provoked widespread resentment among the Spanish nobility, culminating in his ousting in 1669 by the ambitious nobleman John of Austria the Younger, Charles's illegitimate half-brother. The removal of Nithard, however, did not resolve Spain's internal strife. The court soon became a battleground for competing factions, including supporters of Mariana and those aligned with John of Austria the Younger. This infighting paralysed decision-making and further weakened Spain's ability to address pressing domestic and international challenges. Though Charles officially reached the age of majority in 1675 at 14, his physical and mental frailty made it impossible for him to govern effectively. Power continued to shift between various court factions, with the dominant figures being his mother, Mariana, and later her rival, the ambitious nobleman Fernando de Valenzuela. After a brief return to power, John of Austria the Younger forced Mariana into exile and took control of the government, but his sudden death in 1679 once again left a power vacuum. Even as an adult, Charles remained heavily dependent on his advisors, rarely making independent decisions. His court was divided between pro-French and pro-Austrian factions, each vying for control of policy. particularly regarding Spain's role in European conflicts such as the War of the League of Augsburg. The king himself, though occasionally attempting to assert his authority, was often manipulated by his ministers and foreign diplomats. Despite his frail constitution, Charles displayed moments of political awareness, particularly when it came to choosing and dismissing advisors. However, his inability to produce an heir, due to his severe health issues, cast a long shadow over his reign. The question of his succession became a major European crisis as rival powers prepared to claim Spain's vast empire upon his death. The Spain that Charles inherited was already in decline. The once mighty Spanish Empire, which had controlled vast swaths of Europe and the Americas, had begun to crumble under the weight of military defeats, financial insolvency, and internal strife. Charles's reign coincided with the continued erosion of Spanish influence, and while he bore the brunt of this decline, much of it was the result of decisions made by his predecessors. As King Charles II had one primary duty to secure the future of the Spanish dynasty by producing an heir. This burden weighed heavily on him throughout his life, particularly in his marriages. He was married twice, but both unions were marked by heartbreak as he was unable to father children. Beautiful, intelligent, and vivacious Marie-Louise was a stark contrast to Charles. She was thrust into the Spanish court, which was gloomy, conservative, and marked by rigid religious observance. Marie-Louise reportedly tried to bring a sense of light and life to the court, but the marriage was doomed from the start. Marie was said to have found her husband physically repellent, and Charles's ill health made any hope of marital intimacy slim. The pressure to produce an heir weighed heavily on both of them. Despite her efforts to adjust to life in Spain, Marie-Louise fell into deep depression. Tragically, she died in 1689 at the age of 26, reportedly of intestinal problems, though some rumours suggested suicide. Unable to bear the oppressive weight of life as Charles's queen, Charles was devastated by her death. He had truly loved Marie, despite the difficulties in their marriage. Her passing marked yet another sorrow in his troubled life, one that left him more isolated and vulnerable than ever before. Charles's second marriage was to Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess in 1690. Once again, the union was arranged to secure an heir and strengthen alliances. Maria Anna was described as intelligent and determined, but her relationship with Charles was cold and distant. Like his first marriage, this one also failed to produce an heir, despite multiple attempts. This second failure deepened Charles's sense of inadequacy, fueling the gossip that he was indeed cursed. Charles II's death in 1700 marked the end of the Spanish Habsburg line, and it was as tragic as his life had been. His final years were dominated by illness, paranoia, and a sense of impending doom. He suffered frequent seizures, could barely walk, and was haunted by the knowledge that his death would plunge his kingdom into chaos. In his final act, Charles made a desperate decision to name Philip of Anjou, the grandson of his rival, King Louis XIV of France, as his successor in an attempt to keep the Spanish Empire intact. This move was intended to prevent the disintegration of Spain, but it set off the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal conflict that would last over a decade. Yet, even in death, Charles was blamed for Spain's downfall. His reign became synonymous with the empire's decline, and the image of the weak, bewitched king lived on in historical memory. When Charles died, his body was reportedly in such a deteriorated state that his autopsy shocked those present. His body was described as deformed, with shriveled organs and evidence of long-term malnutrition, grim proof of the lifelong toll his illnesses had taken. He left behind a shattered kingdom, a war-ravaged Europe, and a legacy forever entwined with the tragedies of his personal life and his empire's decline.